the US and the UK, a long-held special relationship, or two cultures divided by a common language? Is British politics becoming more American? And if it is that a bad thing? This is Westminster Reimagined. We have some very special guests with us for this episode.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that we're joined from New Jersey by the brilliant Jon Stewart, TV host, comedian, writer, director. He's probably best known for launching and hosting The Daily Show, and now presents The Problem with Jon Stewart on Apple TV.
And from Phoenix, the podcaster and radio host Sam Walker, who grew up in Manchester, England, but now lives and works in Arizona, one of America's new swing states after it turned Democrat in the 2020 election. Welcome to you both.
So I have this long-running fear now that British politics and British politicians are now more and more borrowing from the American playbook, not just in the Prime Minister or the role of Prime Minister being more presidential, but in fact, you know, the tricks primarily of the Republican Party of simplifying things into slogans. We now have, make Brexit, was it?
Get Brexit done.
Get Brexit done.
A classic.
You know, everything's boiled down to three words.
That's our sort of pound shop version of Take Back Control, isn't it?
It is, yes. Take back control, get Brexit done. We have the Anti-Growth Alliance, which is basically anyone who criticises the government is a member of the Anti-Growth Alliance. And for me, I just see this as that process of demonising your opponent, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Jon and Sam, is something that's been happening in US politics for some time now and has become something of an art form.
Completely. It's a masterclass of demonizing the opponent, I would say, Jon. And it's really kind of the making a mythology of the notion of American freedom and sticking to that. I think, moving here from the UK, it was definitely a huge culture shock looking at the political landscape. And that really fell into three different areas. There was this notion of the completely alternate reality that the two political parties really operate in here in the States. I mean, this is mainly due to partisan media, but, opinions presented as fact was the thing that really, really struck me. I mean, we've got a whole news channel. I'm doing news in inverted commas, news channel here, which is actually an entertainment channel officially, which presents opinion as fact. And the fact that the two parties operate in these completely alternate universes, which means that the people who align to those parties never see what's happening on the other side. They only ever hear what is happening in their own bubble. So you can sit and watch an hour of Fox News and then sit and watch an hour of MSNBC and hear the same story reported in completely different ways. One of those has a modicum of fact. One of them does not. But really, if you are not in that world, and you won't ever switch channel.
Which one? Do we know which one?
I think we might have an idea, Jon, of which one's just based on opinion. Yeah.
Although is there one now? Because let's for the sake of oversimplification, call them the left and the right. If the right is seen to get away with just making things up, at some point the left is going to just think, well, we might as well do that as well.
So I think what you're referring to is kind of a phenomenon that happened here. It started about 50 years ago, and a gentleman by the name of Roger Ailes, who was an operative in the Nixon administration, decided that he was going to make sure that what happened to Nixon would never happen to another Republican president. And so he built what the right did really effectively in the 60s and 70s is they saw that the institutions of America were by and large left-leaning. And so the outcomes that they wanted to propose would not have the foundations that they needed in the argument. For instance, there was the best and the brightest, and Kennedy brought on all these academics, and they had studies about poverty and race, and they grounded their policy in a kind of data-based analytics, if you will. And so what the right did is they decided to build a parallel universe to that. They built their own think tanks, colleges, media institutions, so that they would have the patina also of expertise. But the goal wasn't necessarily to study these. It was to lend credence to a worldview, an ideological worldview that they would just place. So there's a real difference in the left-leaning media is sort of more institutionalized and is not agile and is basically shitty at what they do. But the right-wing media is focused on a particular ideology and worldview, which you see now spreading. It's a populist, ethno-nationalist, if you will, kind of worldview, and they are relentless in their pursuit of that dream. Oddly enough, embodied now more by Vladimir Putin than by any American president, other than, I guess, Trump.
Yeah, and it's worked, hasn't it, as far as they're concerned?
Well, I think I certainly, I mean, I would say that type of populism, the pendulum has swung. You know, we all sort of ground our worldview in World War II, the Great War. You know, it's funny that when you're, keep calm and carry on, like slogans have been around forever.
Yeah.
Whichever they're deployed for. But what World War II did is it kind of gave us a mythology that the West is always right, that we are resilient in the face of any threat, that we will defeat it. And once we defeat it, we can control the outcome through rebuilding, through a Marshall Plan. We can rebuild, we will demilitarize and rebuild, but it gave us a false sense of our own ability to control what is a world of too many variables. And I think our arrogance in that has led to a lot of the folly over these last, 70 years.
And what's been happening here, I think if you wanted to draw a parallel with UK politics, we've built up this myth about Brexit in Europe being something that's sucking out the freedom from how we operate. And if we just got rid of that interference, this this enemy across the water, if they suddenly were out of our, we'd be born again and we'd be in this new land where everything was remarkable and we'd have the freedom to grow. And that's the whole Boris Johnson era. I call it an era only.
Does he get an era?
He's got an era.
I didn't know he would get an era.
Unfortunately, for the amount of time he was in office, he's had a big lasting after effect.
Right. And what is the Quirking era going to be like? What is the 38-day era of Quirking? What is that going to be about?
It's like an atomic bomb. It only takes a second, but the after effect lasts for.
I understand.
And I think we have been fed this myth of Europe and bureaucrats and other people coming into our country from overseas, people telling us what to do. Turns out, actually, when we're left to get on with our daily business, we haven't quite worked out what we want to do, and that's been the whole problem. I mean, we're depending on when this podcast is actually going out in the next few weeks, we will still be or will have just come out of the Truss era, where she managed to campaign.
She's getting an era too? I mean, this is 40 days.
We're very reverential towards our politicians here.
All right. You really are.
Yeah.
You know what her era represents? Can I just stop for a second and tell you what I love about what they're doing?
Yeah.
I love the idea that you do opposite actions to get yourself a result. Like what you say is, all right, let's raise interest rates to slow down the economy and stimulate it with high-end wealthy tax cuts. I used to do that in college. You would take a Quaalude, and then you would think to yourself, why don't I mix that with cocaine?
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll all come together in some kind of, it's just kind of an interesting.
What are the downers, the tax cuts and the uppers?
Give me a downer, give me an upper. Let me put it together. Is that NyQuil? Boom. Let me throw that down. I don't know what the hell's going on.
I think you've actually come up with what could be our next economic plan anyway. It's still to be announced. And they're running out of options.
What a great slogan. Cocaine and Quaaludes. Britain is back.
It'll even out in the end. Yeah.
Yes.
And also, but what Boris Johnson did was very successfully, I think, convey this this story of the enemies and us. And if you resided with him, he fused optimism, even though he couldn't explain what he was being optimistic about. Even during a pandemic, he said, it'll all be over in 12 weeks. And it's not that we believed him, but we just liked the idea that he was at least being positive about the imminent tidal wave, And I think that's very much from the American playbook. You know, it's. I think politicians here are seeing it's working with the Republicans. Why don't we do that as well?
Yeah, and we've never had a British dream here, but it's almost trying to borrow from the American dream idea. To
jump in very quickly, Boris Johnson, though, in terms of positivity, that was Reagan era, Morning in America, We're Coming Back. The Donald Trump era was not positivity. It was, there is darkness all around us. We are surrounded by enemies, foreign and domestic, dark and mysterious, all who want to kill us, change our children from boys to girls, give them fentanyl, bring in guns. It was in no way an optimistic message, but it was the flattery of a more authoritarian. It was, there is an other.
That's exactly the argument that, of course, Donald Trump and now the Republicans continue to use. And it's, you know, you look at Ted Cruz being interviewed by international media about Uvalde shootings. And, you know, the reporter brought up the really good point. You know, hang on, you're blaming this tragedy on the school having too many doors, not the fact that a teenage shooter could obtain an assault weapon. You know, this idea of American exceptionalism is kind of eating you alive. And his answer was, if you don't like it, don't come. Don't come to America if you don't like it. If you live here and you don't like it, get out. And that's exactly, as you remember, Donald Trump said that against...
Of course.
OAC and, you know, anyone else who ever stood up against him. And I think, you know, this idea of good versus evil is absolutely being played large across the Republican playbook.
And it's a technique of not, instead of engaging with your opponents, you demonize them so that you don't have to engage with them. It's sort of unpatriotic to engage. It's weak to engage with them.
I mean, like, as John just said, you know, the left is trying to turn your boys into girls. The left are allowing illegals to come and put fentanyl in your children's Halloween candy. That's the big story across the media over the past couple of weeks. And what's really interesting as a British person watching this news is the fact that you can watch an entire discussion. I don't, because I haven't got the stomach. You can watch an entire discussion on Fox News about, you know, Biden letting these illegals in to come and give fentanyl to your kids in their Halloween candy. And every single senator and governor and congressman or woman who comes on goes, yes, 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 you're right. Because they will never, ever appear on a channel that doesn't support their views. They will never be challenged in the way that, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg was on Channel 4 News a couple of days ago. British politicians will allow themselves to be challenged.
Well, you say that, but what's been increasingly happening is that they won't. You know, they will seek out the reporter who is really, they think, is on their side. They'll go, we've now got GB News, which is a little watched, but and little admired.
Oh, it'll metastasize. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine.
Yes.
You'll see.
To which more and more cabinet ministers are going. And Liz Truss was on it when she was campaigning, saying that I like this network because at least it gets its facts right, unlike the BBC. So it's the demonizing of
Let's take a step back, though, to get some perspective. You know, and I always thought this. I've always admired British media in a way that I didn't admire American media. And I've always admired sort of that question time mentality that everybody was going to be held to their thoughts and they were going to have to do that. And I thought, what a wonderful immune system, what a great filtration system that can temper whatever the most base instincts are of political people. And I thought, boy, I wish we had something like that in the United States. But what challenges my hopefulness about that is, y'all make the same shitty mistakes that we make. Even with the good media and the good question time, you still go into Iraq. Even with the good media and the good question time, you still do Brexit. So I wonder, are we placing too much faith in a media to change what is the real problem? The understanding that the pendulum between nationalism and globalism is going to swing back and forth. And if we don't call it what it is, and if we pretend that there are not real effects to the working class through globalism, if we don't understand the economics of it, aren't we playing into the hands of those who will demonize and flatter those prejudices?
But the question is, how do you convey that to the general public who don't want to know, who don't maybe, with the greatest respect, understand economic policy? I don't really understand the details of economic policy. What I do know is that, yeah, you're right. Hey,
simple.
my husband used to work there, and now some guy's taken his job, and that guy happens to be brown. So therefore, and that's how we extrapolate.
But you also get the example of, when politicians who are in power threaten the BBC with defunding or threaten Channel 4, which has a fantastic news service, with privatization and neutering. Whether it's consciously or subconsciously, reporters there are going to be a bit more wary of challenging the government. That they're going to be more subdued, and they use the mantra of impartiality to actually explain away the lack of bite.
I just don't know anymore how much power we can imbue in a media to be the immune system that we need it to be. And, as these things start to get polarized, maybe it's time to realize that there is politics, there is media, and then there's corporate interest. And if we don't address corporate interest, because that's globalization isn't national interest, it's corporate interest. It's them saying, I got to pay these guys what? Yes. Well, Vietnam, I think will go for $2. And you all like cheap T-shirts, right? So let's do that. If we don't bring corporations in, we're just dealing with this now with inflation.
Yes.
Right. So, and I know you guys are as well. Inflation is an incredibly complex economic soup of corporate price index and energy commodities and the Ukraine war and wheat prices and and supply chain through the pandemic. And it's an incredibly complex web. And the one tool we have to fight it is an interest rate dial. We don't even look at it through all its different sectors. We just go, holy shit, food prices are up and energy prices are up, but home prices are down. And these things, I know what I'll do. 2.5. Woo! Fixed it.
An example in the UK where that's happened is the pressure to put a sort of windfall tax on the energy companies who are having these enormous profits. And
I dig that.
And them saying, the Conservatives saying no, because that will put investors off if we harm profits, and these private companies will deter them. Well, but you've got the heads of the companies saying, no, we're fine with the money. We're fine you taking it.
But get them involved. What I don't understand is why don't you make them involved? I understand that corporations, in the United States now, the court has ruled corporations are people.
Yes.
And admittedly, they're sociopaths. They have one goal, and it's driving profit. But if you don't bring them in and make them a part of the solution of an inflationary period, if your only response to that is, what if we make regular people's lives shittier? That's how we're going to tame inflation, and not deal at all with the profit side. It's a ridiculous notion.
Well, I think that, this kind of corporate culture was supposed to be the great prize of some of the Brexiteers that we have in power at the moment. They are Atlanticists. Yeah. Armando's mentioned their obsession with American politics. The idea was we were supposed to get a trade deal with the US, which Joe Biden has poured cold water on.
Let me get to work on that. I didn't realize.
Yeah, thanks for that. But yeah, this idea of the UK becoming more and more like the US is quite bizarre as well, because the UK and the US are quite different. I know we're talking about the parallels here and how lots of our politicians try and absorb a great deal of what's going on there, but we have completely different political systems, health services, attitudes to workers' rights and everything. And it reminds me of that Jon Stewart book that's called If Only They Didn't Speak English. If only the US didn't speak English, we would treat it much more like the very different country that it is from the UK. Oh. And I did want to know from you two how much Americans pay attention to what's going on in the UK, and whether you think we are trying to sort of become a mini America, or whether you do think that we are really different.
From a British person who arrived here, from a purely anecdotal point of view, and I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, which is a unique place in the United States to live, a place that's so at war with so many aspects of society. It's quite unbelievable. But, I would say from the average person that I've met here in the grocery store, at the school gates, at the track or whatever my kids might be doing, there is little to no understanding or interest in what is going on outside America. I mean, for the first 6-7 months I was here, what part of Australia are you from was the question I, was asked the most.
I was just going to ask that. I was going to say Sydney. I heard Sydney, but I wasn't sure because, the connection. But yeah.
And quite swiftly, I realized that the American sense of humor is very different when I would reply, Birmingham, Alabama, and they'd be like the blank face. But and I did actually meet a young woman in Texas recently when I said, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. She looked at me confused, and I said, no, actually, I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm English, but I live in Phoenix. She went, oh, I don't know how people in Phoenix speak. I ain't never been there. And it was like, oh, gosh. Okay.
Let me be clear, though, that is not an anomaly to particular parts of the country, whether it's the heartland, the Bible Belt, the manufacturing centers. We don't care. We are one of the most, we are narcissistic to our core. And so when you say, do Americans view the UK moving towards the US and being Atlanticist and all that? I would venture to say that the word Atlanticist has never been uttered on these shores other than, which ocean do you like? I'm an Atlanticist. I like to swim in the Atlantic off of New Jersey. Whereas I know some people are Pacificists, and they like to swim in California. We don't honestly care. We have and if we did have that worldview, we could not do the foreign policy that we do.
Right.
If we had that sense of, the repercussions of our actions are lasting to real people, we would have a very hard time conducting our policies.
Whereas over here, I think we're sold the myth that actually, we have a glorious partnership.
Yes, a special relationship. A
special relationship where we are seen as equals.
We do enjoy getting Premier League games. I'm not going to lie to you.
Okay.
We do enjoy that.
You're welcome.
It's on ESPN 6. And we watch it generally at odd times.
Yeah.
So that we like.
Okay.
But other than that, not sure.
We've got ourselves a deal.
That's it.
I mean, I think interestingly, from a British point of view, and being someone who's lived here nearly 4 years now, is the longer I've been here, the more I have realised there is actually little that joins us more than little that separates us.
I regularly said that when I was out for a while doing Veep, and we shot it we were based in Baltimore, shooting in Washington and Baltimore and so on. And I'd regularly say to my family at home, the more I know America or get to know America, the more I realize it's a foreign country. Alistair Cooke had that phrase of Britain and America united by, separated by the same language. Which is, we con ourselves into thinking that we are roughly the same because we speak English. But in fact, we're two different separate cultures.
I think we're definitely separate cultures, but if you have to look at it in the main, you know what it's like? If you two ran into each other at a cafe near your studio, you might nod to each other and go, see you in a little bit. But if you ran into each other in Tunisia, you'd go, holy shit, what are you doing here? And that's England and America. When we run into each other in the English, when you can dig down into the intricacies of our economics, of our political system, you think to yourself, we're quite different in the way that siblings can often be antithetical to each other or antagonistic. But when you look at us in the main of the world, we're like, oh my God, my twin. And I think that's why the relationship has the power that it has. Just because there may be another system that has a similar political, although I can't think of one, but you speak English.
Yeah.
Not well. I mean, you understand the difference. I don't. You add U's where U's don't belong. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
I know. Our spelling is so archaic.
First of all, just by the say that you say archaic.
I know.
That's it.
I won't even tell you how I spell it.
The phrase here is old as shit. Yes. That's the phrase. Archaic. I don't even know what that is.
I always used to have a theory that America was such a superpower because, all the deals are done in America, which means that everyone who's doing the deals are jet lagged, and therefore. Every time I've been to America for a meeting, I realize why am I deciding important elements of my future career? Well, in my head, it's 4 a.m. Why am I signing this piece of paper?
That's so funny.
But one thing I wanted to pick up on in terms of the parallel, it's not so much the parallel, but my fear has always been not so much Donald Trump, but the person who is cleverer than Donald Trump, who thinks, I'll do what he did. It's just I'm going to be smarter at it. And what Donald Trump, I think, revealed in his presidency was actually these things that are called norms, these unwritten rules where there's just a gentleman's agreement that you will abide by them. Fuck them. We don't need to do that. And that's, I think, what Boris Johnson was bringing in, his wing of the Conservative Party and what has now been set within politics. That idea that norms don't matter anymore. That, if I want to, the first thing he did was shut Parliament down. It turned out illegally. So he had to apologize for lying to the Queen. If anyone disagreed with them, it wasn't that they were demoted, they were just expelled from the party. I mean, even trying to get them out of office resulted in everyone consulting a non-existent constitution to work out how on earth you remove someone who just simply will go, no, I'm not leaving. What can you do?
But there's the difference, right? There's the difference between the US and the UK, because there was that kind of hundreds of years of democratic process of red tape and old institutions and, he, after the vote of no confidence, he didn't really have any choice. And yes, it did have to hark back to kind of antiquated processes that keep him in power or not. But that wouldn't have been the case here. Those kind of old-fashioned processes just simply don't exist. And I think he never would have been ousted had he been an American president.
Had he tried storming Parliament? Because and I can't recommend this enough. If you get enough people with big enough flag sticks, you can get in. You got to have a plan once you get in. That was the thing here.
That's
the only plan they had was, what if I take a shit in the rotunda? Not a plan. So what you want is, next time we'll talk to him. I'm sure he can come up with something.
Okay. Well, he had the reverse, wasn't it? It was shut Parliament down. Yeah. That was his plan.
It's all the same thing. You're absolutely right. Yeah. But here, I think part of it is, it's a very unique paradox. We cling to the Constitution as though it is written by the gods. Yeah. That it is carved in the stone of Mount Sinai and has that kind of imperative. But when it comes to violating its precepts, as long as it keeps me in power, I really don't care. Yeah. And what happens is they're much better at, imagine somebody carrying a Confederate flag, breaking into the Capitol building, shouting, "We the people," and not understanding what a Thomas Nast cartoon you are in terms of just the utter hypocrisy of it. And what happens here is, and I fall into this as well, imagine when we point out that hypocrisy, that'll show them and they will back down. And, I can remember early on in the Trump presidency, the news media, they would spend hours on, this is a violation of the Hatch Act. She is promoting on her public podium a private message and you're just like, nobody gives a shit. Yeah. And that's the part. We didn't realize the game that we were really playing.
Well, that makes it harder for, people. I did a show over here called The Thick of It, which was set in a golden age. Set in a golden age where politicians, rules were and norms were around, and we occasionally showed how they would bend the rules and occasionally break the rules. But now, what's been said is there are no rules. If Trump can say I can shoot a guy in the face in Fifth Avenue, and still people would vote for me.
But that's his audience. If he gave a guy a vaccine in the middle of Fifth Avenue, he would lose a lot of votes.
He had the vaccine, and all of the Fox News anchors had the vaccine, and are now campaigning against, the illegally mandated vaccine.
So are we at the point of no return? Once your legislature is full of people like that, then it's game over for
Armando, it's really interesting for me to be here and listen to this fake news media production that you all are putting on. You've been corrupted by the fake news media. You don't have, this was an historically corrupt election and stolen. So,
oh, yeah.
I'm interested in the fake news media.
We also keep children in the basement as well.
Armando, I'd like to know, why haven't you charged Hunter Biden yet?
Yeah, the laptop. We haven't even mentioned that. Goodness me.
Did Donald Trump storm the Capitol and did he lose? I don't know, but the laptop is also. And by the way, Obama still has all classified documents. And you know where he keeps them? A Chuck E. Cheese in Fresno. That's where he keeps them.
Yeah.
It's not guarded at all. In fact, he keeps them on the tables. There are children's birthday parties being held right now where the placemats are nuclear secrets. Nuclear secrets, Armando.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about corruption? How dare you, sir? At long last, have you no decency, sir?
What do we do?
All right, so here's the deal.
What do we do other than this? What do we do?
So we look at it through the pendulum of history and the perspective of, look, we always assume that World War II was a fait accompli, that the forces of freedom would always defeat the fascists and the authoritarians. But none of this is guaranteed. This is not new. What you are seeing is in no way an invention. It is perhaps weaponized slightly by new forms of media so that it feels more personal and more immediate and more relentless. But it is in no way new. And the battle that we are fighting is the battle of time immemorial. Democracy is messy. It is an analog system in a digital world. Fascism is more agile. And as long as the authoritarian is your authoritarian, then you don't give a fuck. I've always felt that the greatest hedge against fascism in the United States is that we are so largely multicultural that it's very difficult to demonize the right group of people that will allow you to seize power in that way. But what I realize now is the problem will be permanent minority rule, that it will not be, fascism won't come in a cloud of smoke. It'll come in a bureaucratic change to state legislatures.
Yes, yes.
Being able to control the election proceedings. And that's how it will all be done, with the patina of legitimacy.
And just to kind of highlight one tiny little development here that for me is just symptomatic of where they want to take UK politics. We now have to have ID cards and proof of ID at elections to eliminate voter fraud, which never existed as a problem. And that's stolen completely from the Republican playbook, which is like,
but it's sowing the seeds of doubt,
suppress the opposition.
Yeah. You're welcome. The best part about it is then they make all that, very difficult to obtain or not. So
yes,
the Democrats might say, all right, voter ID. So whenever you register for your license, you get a voter ID to do the thing. Or whenever you or we create a program where we go out and we make those IDs for people, and no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put money behind that.
No,
because keeping down the vote in certain precincts is helpful to them.
I find it extraordinary that the gerrymandering, it's done by the party in power in that state. It's not by some independent body who's overseeing the redrawing of boundaries. Being done by the party in power, as if you just said, John, has the desire to oppress certain sectors of society that they know will vote for the other guys. And that's happening in real time in front of our faces. And it's happening in those red states now. And yet nothing, because of the way the government is set up here, nobody can stop it from happening.
Well, these are all, it's all still within the main of how we have tried to influence and rejigger elections. So gerrymandering, a little bit of voter suppression, a little bit of machine politics. And Democrats and Republicans have both partaken in the politics of advancing your group's efforts to make sure that, elections are math. And if you can't get more people to vote for your guy, then you got to get less people to vote for their guy because it's still math. You still need that plus one. But what's novel here, so the U.S. always has a peculiar problem in that our elections are run by partisans. But generally, they are partisans that have, as Armando said earlier, a gentleman's agreement to the administrative state. We're going to count the votes and we're going to certify it. We might not be happy about it, but we'll do it. Since 2020, the goal has been to harass and threaten those people out of a job and replace partisans with zealots. And now our elections, it was peculiar enough that they're run by partisans. Now they're going to be run by zealots. Yeah. And when you put in zealots and ideologues, really all bets are off. And I think that's where we're going to run into the biggest problem.
So what about, the notion again of living here and understanding the country and the culture of this country more and more and more? America is not one country. And I think this is what I absolutely believed it was when I still lived in the UK. Living here now, America is not one country. And the idea that one president can rule over such a vastly disparate collection of states.
But you're going to end up with two countries then, aren't you, really?
Let's be frank. We've always been two countries. I mean, we fought a civil war. We've always been, but the problem is it's not as easy to define as red states and blue states.
Yeah.
It's really, we're three countries. We're a rural country, we're an urban country, and we're an ex-urban country. And the policies that hold for, it's one of the things that's so frustrating about even the gun debate in our culture. Gun violence in populated areas is different than gun violence in rural areas, which is different than gun violence in ex-urban areas. And if we think that there's just one, everything has a different policy measure that can adjust to. But like when you talk about, I'm going to move out of a red state, the problem is it's not necessarily the red state. It's that the urban center of the red state in no way follows along with what some of the rural areas of your red state.
Well, look at Georgia.
I mean, so it's a much more complicated, we're not two countries. It's, if you look at the map, we're really just a matrix.
We're almost out of time. The New Statesman's satellite
I am not going to leave, Armando. We're not out of time. And I am going to stay.
New Statesman subscribers can have Jon Stewart on a 24-hour live
Big Brother
camera following him. I kind of always like to leave on a positive, though. The only positive thing I can see, the current events in the UK, is that politicians like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss have tried all these nefarious moves and have actually, the public's onto them.
Yeah.
The public has seen that they're actually can't be trusted. That's the one positive I've seen in the events of the last 4 or 5 weeks.
No, it's true. And I think people were making the point that Liz Truss has obviously gone right down in her popularity ratings, and that actually there is a floor or a ceiling for someone like Donald Trump, who would always have 35% of the vote or something.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, you're right, the public are perhaps not so easily fooled as in the US. And that does bring me on to my last question for you both before we have to wrap up, which is, we've been talking about voter ID, politicians evading political interviews and things here. Do you think we're just whining compared with what you're going through over there, or would you like to sort of give us some advice, because these are the kind of warning signs?
You want positivity, okay? I'm just
just sheer despair. That will do. That will do.
Yeah, don't get guns. I mean, you're talking about the public being sick to death now of what's happening in the UK. I mean, just the other day here, there was a couple who actually run a Trump memorabilia store not far from where I live in Arizona, who have said that if Carrie Lake and the rest of the Republican governors aren't successful at the midterms, and there will be several, they said that we will have no choice, and this is a couple in their 70s who is going to be a really good shot, that we have no choice but to take up arms. And we know it's going to start towns fighting towns, states fighting states, and civil war is coming. And that is, I mean, I don't know whether I'm getting hysterical in my kind of British ways, but John, you can probably speak to this. That seems to be a kind of growing excitement.
Look, we kill 40 to 50,000 of each other every year anyway, whether it's done for political purposes or not. We are living in a incredibly dystopian era in the United States. But
so that gets an error as well, does it?
Dystopian gets an error. If Liz Truss gets an error,
dystopia must.
I mean, dystopian has to get it. But the 1960s and the 1970s were no cakewalk. Every time we came up with a brilliant leader, we killed him. Every time, we sent over thousands of young men to die in Vietnam so that the domino theory of communism wouldn't take hold. I mean, in the perspective of history, oddly enough, we are living in decent times. There are certainly very disturbing dark clouds on the horizon, as often come up in many eras. How we deal with them and where we go with them is going to be the real fear for me. Is the democratization of destruction. Is that, atomic weapons were an anomaly reserved for very powerful countries that could spend a shit ton of money on research and development of weapons. There's gonna come a time where they figure out the destructive nature, and you're gonna be able to look it up on the internet and make it with shit in your house. And as you see with the weapons of war that populate our streets, for me, that's the larger. I don't know that the impulses of man are any different, but when you allow man on a more individual basis to be as destructive as they can be in that moment, I don't necessarily worry about sustained civil war. I really don't. I do worry about prolonged chaos due to the ability of, one of the reasons why I thought the Iraq War was such a fucked up endeavor, and even 20 years in Afghanistan, is you will never bomb a country so hard that 19 of them don't want to get in planes and fly into one of your buildings. You just can't do it. So you need a different plan. And that's my fear, is that the amount of damage that individuals can do so outstrips their ability to contain that. That's where my concern would be.
And this was
wait, are we going to do on a hopeful note?
Yeah.
Wait, did you want to go a hopeful note? All right.
I was just going to say that was the positive.
That was my fault.
If that's
that was
the
my
positive,
fault. That was my fault. Yeah.
But we'll leave it there.
I
Because
went dark
you
at the
said
end.
you weren't
I
expecting
apologize.
civil war, so I suppose that's something.
I'm not expecting civil war.
not expecting civil war.
I am not.
Yes. And we've seen through Liz Truss, so it's sort of, it's the same.
Everything's going so
okay.
well.
Thank you so much. Obviously, we could talk for hours on this and many other subjects, and maybe one day we will. But thank you very much, Sam. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's good to see you.
Thanks for sorting it all out once and for all.
Armando, I'm always here for you. You know that.
Well, what did you think, Armando? I mean, it was interesting because while we did get some warning signs that the UK is following in some of the same directions as US politics, we also did acknowledge that we are really different countries still.
We are, and a glint of hope in that the Brits so far haven't been taken in by the more overt thefts from the Republican playbook so far. But I did ask for some positives at the end, and we did get dystopia instead. So
the era of dystopia.
The era of dystopia. I think what's happened is British politics, I think even Blair, from the era of Blair, Thatcher obviously bonded with Reagan. Blair was obsessed with Clinton. Blair was obsessed with George Bush to a fatal degree. And it's going to take us a while to pull back from that, I'm afraid.
What do you think? Is British politics becoming more American? And does it matter? Let us know in the comments. You can watch all of our previous episodes of Westminster Reimagined by clicking the video link on the screen now. On the New Statesman YouTube channel, we publish new videos every week to help you understand what's really going on in UK politics. Subscribe now so you don't miss a video.